This presentation, I'm going to use a case study which I actually developed for a meeting that Roberto organized last year in Lausanne on the discipline of anticipation. A very interesting, thought-provoking meeting. This is a quote from Margaret Mead, who was one of our early fellows in the Academy. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And I think some of our examples show that sometimes that's a very small group that is really at the center of it. Today I wanted to... are you sure you have interest? Yes. I want to use the example of what happened in the U.S. during the Civil War when Lincoln became president. And I have 5 basic points I'd like to illustrate. One is the process by which our social organization evolves. In this case, it's the whole organization of the country, which really went through a transition from being a loose confederacy of states into a strong federal government, which is what the U.S. has been the last 150 years. The second is to discuss a theme that Janani raised yesterday about social power, and look at where the sources of that social power really come from during a critical... I think this is an example that really shows the sources and the conflicting sources of that power. Third, to look more at a theme we discussed yesterday about the relationship between the objective external social reality and the subjective psychological reality both of individuals and of the society, and how they interact with each other and how important they are. Fourth, and I'm just going to touch on a topic which Roberto is going to elaborate on very much, and that is the sources of determination, how much it's coming from the past, how much it is influenced by our perceptions of the future, our aspirations for the future. And finally, a theme I just mentioned yesterday, and that is the role of the individual in this social process and how important it is, and how effectively we can understand social processes, how important it is to include the individual for that purpose. So the context was, some of you, maybe all of you are familiar with part of it, so I'm going to go through it quite quickly, and if you have questions, please ask. But the U.S. in 1861, there was an agrarian South and industrial North. The South was large plantation economy, producing cotton and tobacco and sugar, heavily dependent on slave labor in order to work. Their biggest markets were in Europe, and European industry, remember this is just the early stages still of the Industrial Revolution. Europe was completely dependent on, not completely, but relied heavily on North America for its cotton, which was king cotton at that time. The price of cotton had come down so dramatically during the Industrial Revolution from being an expensive fabric. It made cloth available to the common man. And England and France, particularly, even other countries, were relying heavily on the southern cotton. The Democrats, who were the political party of strength in the southern states, supported slavery and the states' rights of each state to determine whether they were going to be free or slave. The North was largely anti-slavery, but their commitment to anti-slavery was, we don't want it here. It's not like there was a mass movement in the North that we have to abolish slavery everywhere. Okay, you have it and you need it. We don't want it here, and we don't want it in other states that come up as we expand the country westward. But we are not anxious, and this was the large sentiment, that all these slaves should be liberated in the South and suddenly migrate to the northern cities. That was not the situation at all. I have given this with due deference to the impact of the past on the present, and I'm not going to go through it, but just to indicate, the idea of abolishing slavery, it started 160 years earlier when England said that any slave who arrives in England is automatically free. So slavery was abolished in England, but that didn't prevent the English merchants from being very active in the slave trade, and slavery was very important for them. And they were not only trading in slaves, but they were taking slaves to their colonies, especially in the West Indies, where they were driving the sugar production and other things. But this shows a succession. I was very interested to see this. The second item in the list was Russia. Russia abolished slavery. It's not what I thought about my concept of feudal Russia. Russia was one of the first to abolish slavery. And then it went in succession. Countries abolished slavery at home, but still enjoyed the profits of slavery overseas. And you'll note that slavery in American colonies began to be illegal. They were also among the first: Pennsylvania, Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and so forth. And this went on. And this went on continuously up until the Civil War. So my point was that what's happened in America has to be seen in the context of what's happening in the whole world. And this comes back to the issue of values, which was raised by several of you yesterday as a determining force, and which Winston's going to talk to later in the week, that we have to understand that there is a movement that was not just in America, but a movement in the whole of Western civilization to get rid of this thing. And this is the situation that Lincoln faced in 1861. Now, there was also the lure of the future at the same time. This map shows that the United States consisted of the dark blue states at that time. Texas was an independent republic for just a few years. California was an independent republic for some time, mainly wresting them away from Mexico. And you had this huge area in light blue, which was really up for grabs. And so the concept of manifest destiny of America to go all the way to the Pacific and make all of this eventually part of America was really one of the problems that precipitated the Civil War. Because according to the Missouri Compromise of 1821, I believe it was, nothing above this, you can't see it, but nothing above the lower third, roughly, of the country could be slave. And anything above that, slavery was banned. But the southern states were proposing and pushing that every new territory would have the right to decide on slavery for themselves. And then they were sending people into the new territories just to vote, just across the Missouri or the Mississippi River, just to vote in favor of slavery and then come back home because they wanted slavery to go. So the future, the perception of what is in the future was powerfully in mind in determining this. It wasn't so much that anybody started a war in order to end slavery in the South. The war was fought over whether slavery should be extended or not and allowed to grow. So the situation in 1861 was America was a confederation with a weak central government. The ideal of equality from the Declaration of Independence sounded great on paper, but it was anything but a reality even 70 years later. There were very few Americans who really favored real racial integration. 11 of the 33 states were slave states. And even though slavery was in retreat in Europe, there was a strong impetus to try to extend slavery in North America. This was the situation when Abraham Lincoln came to power. The moment he was elected, the southern states seized the forts, seized the weapons that were there in the South, and declared themselves an independent Confederate States of America. Lincoln himself, because his psychology is going to be important for us to really understand who he was born in a log cabin, very poor, self-educated. educated himself as a surveyor, a lawyer, became a postmaster. He entered politics as a personal opposition to slavery. It's not so much that there was a great social movement at that time, but his heritage was Quaker, going back generations. He had a strong personal conviction that slavery was wrong and it should be abolished. He managed to get elected to Congress for just a single term, just one term, lost in the race to the Senate, and got elected by a minority popular vote as president, primarily because everybody wanted somebody who wouldn't shake the boat, who wouldn't rock the boat, somebody who was perceived as weak, somewhat indecisive, doesn't have any political backing from the people, and therefore couldn't do anything in this precarious situation to cause either great trouble to the North or the South. So this was the situation actually in 1861. The green were the southern states that seceded. The dark red were 3 other slave states, but they did not secede from the Union. They were very concerned because they're all on the border. If you had 2 countries here, the idea of being in that border area, if a slave runs across the border, there's going to be tremendous tension as to their position. So they were not convinced that this was the right solution. The pink states were now part of the country, and the gold ones were up for grabs, and this was the future of America. As a president, he was considered a second-rate country lawyer without experience. He was thought to be weak, idealistic, but that was another word for unrealistic, and indecisive. The New England elite looked down on him as a commoner, and the Washington people looked down on him as a novice. He formed a bipartisan cabinet against all the pressure from all sides. In fact, he had a philosophy, I want to have my enemies where I can keep an eye on them. And he brought them into the cabinet, and he had at least 3 or 4 people with presidential aspirations in the cabinet who thought they would more rightly be the president than him. And but he co-opted them in a remarkable way. He had a military commander who was from the South, was with Southern sentiments, McClellan, who actually refused to obey his instructions. Not exactly our conception of the commander-in-chief of the United States today. But he said, well, Lincoln doesn't know anything about warfare. I don't have to listen to him. And there was even an instance in which Lincoln went to his house in order to talk to him because the general refused to come to the White House on a call. And McClellan came in after a half an hour, went upstairs and went to sleep. And when Lincoln asked, well, asked the servant, well, he's gone to bed, he's not available today. So this was the level of authority that the President of the United States had. In fact, when he was elected, his total White House staff was 1 aide. The Congress financed 1 person as an aide for him at that time. The one thing that Congress wanted was to end the war without touching the slave issue because they just didn't see any way to handle the slave issue at the same time. But you had abolitionists in the North. They were a minority, but they were firebrands who were really pressing on the righteous issue, the Puritans, the Quakers, and all that, this is the time we must abolish slavery everywhere. The military situation was quite desperate for the North. The Northern Army had a total of 16,000 soldiers. Compare that with, by the end of the war, they had 800,000, and you get an idea of how unprepared they were. They didn't have a single general with military experience, whereas all of the West Point trained generals with real experience belonged to the South. In the first year, the South won virtually all the battles, and they also controlled the Mississippi, which was really the lifeblood for commerce and also the path west. So, and at the same time, England and France were secretly arming the South because in return for cotton, because they didn't want the cotton to be cut off. And even when the North blockaded the cotton, the Southern trade, They were helping the South smuggle cotton out in exchange for arms so that their industry should go. So this was really an example of a precarious situation. You've got the pressure of abolition coming from behind. You've got the lure of the future. You've got a southern states very resistant to accept what looked like inevitable now, but didn't seem inevitable to them, and with a short circuit of the European countries that have abolished slavery but want the fruits and benefits of the slave trade, which is common. The turning point came, I'm not going to go through the history of the war, but there was a crucial turning point in which Lee invaded Maryland, where they had plantations and they had slaves, and expected to be well received by the farmers, and this was from the South, and they were not. And then another southern invasion into Kentucky, a slave state. They expected all of the farmers to turn and support the South. They did not. And Lincoln perceived at that point that this was the time to act. For all the apparent indecisiveness of Lincoln, he refused to be pushed in one direction or another. When he made a decision, and how he made those decisions we'll discuss, when he made a decision, he refused to be balked by the intense opposition even within his own cabinet. When he saw that this response in Maryland and Kentucky, he ordered McClellan to attack Virginia on penalty of being removed from command if he didn't. McClellan attacked, and it was the first big northern victory. He would never have done it if Lincoln had not demanded. And immediately after the northern victory, without consulting anyone, Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation declaring that slavery is abolished in the southern territories, which are not under northern control at all, but clearly making it clear that the goal of this war is not just to keep the country united, but it is the abolition of slavery. It's worth a 6-day course to understand how Lincoln made that decision and how right he was about it. But the short answer is that he understood, I think, better than anybody else, that ultimately it's going to be the consent of the people that determines who wins this war. The cost of the war was horrendous in terms of lives. In fact, it was the biggest, it was the first really modern mechanized war in the world, where everybody was using modern armaments from the Industrial Revolution. The losses were colossal. In one day, in one battle, there were about 20,000 soldiers killed. I mean, this is because they had the weaponry now. But he sensed he was walking a fine line. What would the American people sanction? What would they support? And when he perceived that this was the right time, even though Congress disagreed with him, he pushed this through, issued this proclamation. What happened as a result was that the European abolitionists, who were a strong force, not commercial force, obviously, they jumped on this and they compelled the English Parliament to withdraw all support from the South and really support the North. Up until then, it looked like the North couldn't win the war, and therefore those who were practical and said, at least let's have cotton, this country's going to be split up anyway. He had that perception. Coming from the people, he really had that perception of what the people would accept. The outcome is the North won the war. The U.S. was reunited. At the end of the war, Congress passed the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. After horrendous destruction, within a decade, the U.S. economy was booming, and by 1900, the U.S. economy was larger than UK, Germany, and France combined. It was accounting for 1/3 of the industrial production in the world. I mentioned that for the point, supposing Lincoln had failed, and anyone who reads the story will realize how probable that was, how likely a possibility that was, that the U.S. would have been split up into two. It probably wouldn't have been split up into two. It probably would have ended up being split up into 10 or 15 and resemble much more the Europe that's trying to unite today and try to gain the power of a consolidated country that the U.S. has been for the last century, the whole history of the world would be different. And when you see what it actually came down to, it was a hair-thin determining factor. And of course, the story of the blacks is not over, and I've come back to that. This raises a number of questions, not just for this session, but for our discussions this week. How could one man have such a dramatic impact on history? Where did he acquire that power? What were the capacities, personal capacities in him that made it possible? What was the process by which it was achieved? What enabled him to be so effective? How did he convert an extreme challenge into unimaginable opportunity for America? If we look at the physical world, which Ivo was introducing us to yesterday in the physical sciences, we see the physical world can very crudely be divided in physics into three planes. You have the microcosm, the infinitesimal microcosm of particle physics. You have the infinite macrocosm of astronomy, of astrophysics. And in between, you have the level on which we live, where Newton's laws of motion and all work perfectly the way they should without any qualification at any side, on any side. I think there's a parallel here to the human world we live in. We've got the macrocosm of society with all its social groupings, which we discussed yesterday, with all of the complex attributes of society, the social constructions of knowledge, the values, and attitudes and beliefs and behaviors. We've got the microcosm of the individual, which we explored in great detail last week in our course on individuality and accomplishment. The thoughts, feelings, beliefs, opinions, aspirations, urges, everything that goes into constituting an individual. And we've got our lives on the surface as individuals, 1 foot inside in our subjective world, 1 foot outside in the world around us, trying to reconcile the pressures and find out how to harmonize and grow and develop and fulfill our purposes in the world. I find this a helpful analogy in trying to think about a science of society. And what we see in the social context is an intense interaction between these planes. We've got the social macrocosm strikes us as enormous in size, variety, incredible in speed, always changing. Its complexity defies our conception. When we look inside at ourselves and other people and try to understand them, we find an equal great complexity at the micro level. Things are changing so quickly, it's hard for us even to monitor what I was feeling or thinking or sensing a few minutes before. Things are so fleeting, we can't track them, we can't measure them, we can't organize them. We are ourselves a mystery to ourselves. And these two, the inner and outer, are combining in interacting in very complex ways, both consciously and unconsciously. This is a quote from Sri Aurobindo, the Indian philosopher, that has helped me quite a bit in trying to understand society. He said, life evolves through growth of consciousness. Consciousness evolves through greater organization and perfection of life. A greater consciousness means a greater life. Let's take consciousness, let's take consciousness in the sense in which we usually use it, that consciousness is our awareness. Consciousness includes our view of the reality around us, our social construction, the limitations or the perceptions of our knowledge, the limitations of our constructions. What do we do as human beings? We try to organize our lives guided by our consciousness, what we're conscious of. What we're unconscious of, we can't organize. It may be organized in its own way. It's beyond our control. You cannot handle something that you're not conscious of. Our conscious mind can apply its powers only to that of which we're conscious, and that's what we do. We try to organize. I like to imagine back about 10,000 years ago to the invention of agriculture and what that process must have been like. This is just a vicarious experience. But human beings had been watching nature grow crops for tens of thousands of years. They've been watching crops growing in different places. They've been seeing that it rains some places, that the soil is of different colors, that the seasons are different, that some things bloom at different times. How many tens of thousands of years it took for their consciousness or their observation of physical nature to reach a point where they said, what nature does, I can do. Instead of going and running around the forest or moving from nomads from one place to the other, tribal nomads to go to where the food is, hey, this is a place where crops grow. This is a place that has rain. They figured out, took a long time, I'm sure, the relationship between the soil, the sun, the rain, the season, and the crop, and figured out how to replicate and then, of course, improve on what nature did. Once they were aware of that potential, they organized it, and that was the birth of agriculture about 10,000 years ago. And then they organized the social life of the country. Instead of having nomadic villages, which were tribal places which were on the move constantly, they began to have sedentary villages, and then you could have sedentary towns where people could come and exchange things, and so forth, and so on. So this is looking at it at a very fundamental level, the growing consciousness led us to organize our life in different ways. And I think that's still the process that we're doing today on the internet. What do we have in common? What do we as individuals and the society have in common? We're both, and Janani said it yesterday, we are both living organizations. And we see one of the faculties of organization is it's a creative capacity of the mind to create order, structure, and process. To organize things in such a way, not just organize things physically, but to create structures that work in particular ways and processes that work in particular ways. Well, that's what our society is. We've got structures, groupings, levels of authority, hierarchy, specialization, as we discussed, coordination, as we discussed yesterday. The human personality, which is an equally complex and difficult thing to map and comprehend, also has an organization. We organize around our central values, our goals, our needs, our knowledge, our capacities, our habits. We organize our life and our action. We organize our emotions. We organize our knowledge around the goals we're seeking. We organize our emotions around those we can trust or those we fear, and those activities that are most important to us or those that we want to avoid. There is an organization of personality which has been evolving over time, which is developing in each of us over time, just as the organization of the society, which we can much more readily see, has been evolving. Both of these organizations, the macrocosm and the microcosm, are organizations of our energy. It tells how we use our energy, organizations of ideas, attitudes, emotions, intentions, and capacities. We're not going to go into, this was a topic we discussed much more, but if you want to look at a reductionist view of human personality, this is a reductionist view. What do we have inside? What's going on inside us? You reach in and you'll see all of these things are there. And maybe I have left out a few, or I've used traits refers to a large number. Faculties refer to, there's a lot of things you might add to this. But we are these constellations. Some of these are constellations of mental elements. Some of them are constellations more of physical elements, like the skills and the habits. Some of them are more emotional, based on our desires, our feelings, our sentiments. But we have an organization of all of these. We are not just a grab bag of these independent elements. And if you look at the constituents of society, the subjective constituents, not talking about the roads and the buildings and the schools and all, we too, as a society, we contain all of these elements, all of these subjective elements. And of course, they're related to one another. It's not independent. We get most of the knowledge we have, the skills we have, the habits we have, the ambitions and motives and urges we have, we get them from the society because we've been grown up with other people. We've learned what's permissible, what's not permissible, and we've internalized it. And of course, if the society's changing, it's because some individual, like a Lincoln, decided that it's time to abolish slavery in America, and this is the date on which we're going to do it. He didn't invent the idea. We saw it coming for 160 years before, and there must have been times way before that somebody voiced that we should have a freedom before England finally abolished it. So we see there's a constant transmission back and forth between the individual and the collective in both directions. Our personality, individual personality, is more complex than that. We are not just constellations of these factors. We are organized in layers, kind of like the society is. We've got our external manners, which we express to one another and we work on in society. We've got our conscious thoughts. We've got subconscious impulses and characters that even we don't know what's going on and driving us. We've got creative capacities which surprise us until an opportunity comes or a challenge comes and we have something creative coming out. And there's something in us, some element of uniqueness, maybe more apparent in some people than others, but some element of uniqueness of each of us that makes us different, distinct, just like our physical fingerprints. And Janani spoke to this in very excellently last week, and her presentation is up on the web, or will be for anybody who would like to go into it more. We can also think about the organization of our personality in a different way in terms of levels, and Ivo and I have written about this in an article that we published together. We have and Alberto's constantly talking about the interaction between the physiological and the biological, the psychological, mental faculty. We exist at different levels. We showed a movie last week, an excerpt from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, in which the hero Darcy goes to propose to the heroine Elizabeth, and while he's asking to marry her, he's telling her, his mind is telling her why he thinks this is a bad idea, and that he's doing against his own better judgment. His mind and his heart are going in opposite directions. So we not only have levels of personality, but we have internal conflicts between those levels as well. And of course, if you think about society, you'll see this is true also here. In the Declaration of Independence, we started by saying that all men are created equal, endowed with certain inalienable rights. And the people who signed it, more than half of the people who signed that, and presumably believed it, had slaves. Their ideal was we must get rid of slavery, but the physical reality was we have slaves. So we've got those conflicts going on in society as well. So what is this thing, this organization? And I'm trying to draw a parallel. You take it in general, and I don't mean to say it's exact, but a parallel between the way society is organized subjectively and the way the individual is organized. How do we describe that organization? I think one thing is clear. It's not mechanical like a machine or an assembly line. We don't work that way, and society doesn't work that way either. It's not just like an onion with many layers. We do have layers. We have layers individually. The society has layers and depths to it, but that's not enough of an understanding to fully describe it. It's not confined to a physical level, as a physical system is. which in a physical system you can understand it simply by looking at the physical dimension. We don't consult the stone for its emotions or its ideas or its values or its future aspirations. But in human context, we can't compress and collapse reality to one plane and think that we can deal with it adequately. Nor is it like an orange that can be separated into separate independent sections, as we so commonly do in our social science disciplines, and think that we can deal with these elements of reality. The closest maybe we can come to it is, it's a living web of interconnections. It's an organism. It's a living organism. It has all of these attributes, and we can point to each of these attributes, but none of them is a satisfactory or sufficient explanation for what it is. It's complex, and no matter how we cut the orange or how dissect it in which direction, we see this complexity. And if we're trying to understand either society or an individual, we have to take into account what do we know and what is the knowledge on which we're acting, what are the skills and capacities we have, what are our aspirations, what are our values, what is the energy and strength we have to do it, and so forth. I'm not creating any clarity here, I'm sure, but because I don't think this communicates it. What I'm trying to communicate is the multidimensional complexity that we need to take into account. But these are not unknowns. These are not inaccessible elements, but they're elements we would have to understand and honor and not ignore. So organization of personality, whether it's the personality of a society, and societies, we call it culture, or the organization of an individual, it can constituent parts, levels, layers. It's organized around some central goals. All of these elements are interconnected, coordinated, and integrated with each other in complex ways. But that integration is partial. Neither in the society nor in the individual are we fully integrated to organize all our capabilities and potentials to fulfill what we seek. We've got things going in different directions. We've got capabilities we don't even know about. We have opportunities in the world we don't even know about. The reason that we're here, the reason that we're struggling with problems in the world is not because we have insoluble problems, but because the global community is not integrated. We're not able to integrate our economics and our political science with our social needs or with our environment. So the integration, whatever we have, is a partial, evolving, unfolding story. Human accomplishment, then. What can we say about this? Every individual carries within him an accumulated experience from humankind, in essence. And I think that was one of the main points that Janani was trying to make yesterday. We're having a conversation here today because we have inherited, without doing anything to deserve it, maybe some of you did a lot more than I did, a common language which we can exchange. I learned this at birth. For some of you, it's a second or third language, so you work much harder and deserve some credit for it. We're using a technology that I don't think any of us invented. We're using concepts that have been borrowed from thinkers going way back to the time of Aristotle, insights and so forth. And all of this we have inherited. It doesn't mean that we've only inherited good things. We've inherited prejudices and fears and anxieties and ignorances and social constructions that we're not able to get out of, and complexes and so forth as well. But we carry in an accumulated baggage of the past. At the same time, we have expectations for the future. We have ideas about what's going to happen, about aspirations, about what we want to see in the future, where we're going. And all of this is interacting in this present moment. In this case, we're interacting with each other. Our past, we each bring a past, we each have a future. We're interacting with each other in this present moment to have an experience. And what we accomplish is the result of these three coming together. The examples I gave yesterday and the one I gave today were intended to illustrate, one of the things they were intended to illustrate is the catalytic role that the individual plays in social change. And I'm emphasizing it because I think if there is going to be any really effective social science, not just a comprehensive science of society, we have to be able to factor in. We can't just say the individual is like the subatomic particle, is unpredictable, uncertain, and therefore we factor him out and we just deal with statistics. I think the impact of the individual is too great to be written off and just to be subject to statistical norms. We see individuals having enormous impact. And I think I like to think of the individual as a catalyst, though the analogy is somewhat faulty. Catalyst is a wonderful concept in chemistry. You take something, put it into something else, and you get a reaction and a result that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten, and the catalyst comes back just the way it was before. It remains unchanged. It's a marvel of nature. Well, individuals are like that, but the analogy breaks down a little, because every individual is dramatically changed and shaped by their experience of being a catalyst. It's not a one-way street. The individual is a catalyst of the society, and the society is all the time shaping the individual. And looking at the lives of any of these people, like Steve Jobs, who's very contemporary, you really see that process of how it went back and forth in both directions. The question, one of the questions I've tried to raise is, how do individuals access this power? Janani was talking about a power. It may be for creation or it may be for destruction. But how does one individual access this power? I've given 4 examples. Lincoln, I said, I think the best answer I'm able to come up with, maybe somebody has a better one, is he identified with the aspirations of the American people for 2 things, freedom and unity. And he knew that he had to balance them first. He knew that freedom for the blacks was not the primary concern for most of the Americans. Unity of the country was much more important. But at the same time, there was a powerful minority, and there was the whole pressure of history behind them, and there were the aspirations of the blacks and every minority who wanted to acquire an equal status. There's a reason why they put this high ideal in the Declaration of Independence. Not because it was realized, but because it's an intention for the future. And of course, we're still trying to fulfill it today. It's still an intention for the future, as all our values are. In the case of Morgan, he had the trust I mentioned yesterday. He had the trust. What people really wanted was somebody they could rely on to restore stability. He wasn't a Hitler or a Mussolini who was promising order out of chaos. He was one who promised, who was the best hope that everybody had for restoring stability in a financial system that was rapidly crumbling. And he insisted on that. He dedicated himself to it. That was his character. Those were his actions. Yesterday I said that FDR appealed to America's self-confidence, pride, courage, trust, and also in a way said that the problem has been created by your fear. And Americans don't like to be told that they're afraid and that they're running away from reality. And I think he had many other things, of course. He had a remarkable charm. He had a remarkable skill as a communicator that was able to deliver this message in a way that touched the hearts of tens of millions of people. And, of course, he did it so successfully, he's the only American president that ever elected for more than 2 terms. He was elected for 4 terms. And finally, the Republicans said this has to stop. So in his 4th term, they amended the Constitution so no other president can be for more than 2. They weren't sure how long he would go on to become a dynasty. And in the case of Apple, I didn't tell the story. I love the story of Apple because I think it's so much more profound than a business success. But Steve Jobs, in the last session, we showed the advertisement they released at the Super Bowl game in 1984 as a play on George Orwell's 1984, to say that 1984 is not this totalitarian vision that Orwell feared. It's the year of the Macintosh, which is going to liberate humanity and empower every individual. He was a person who was really in touch with the aspirations and the anxieties of our generation, that were really afraid of the machine. They're really afraid of what the spread of the computer was going to mean for our humanity, for our employment and other things. And if anybody embodied that, the creativity of the machine, it was him. He was in touch with something deep and powerful. So just going back to Lincoln for a minute, a little bit more about his personality. Let's see if something resonates for us that helps explain what he did. I mentioned he was self-educated. Even once he became president, he decided he had to understand law, military. So he started reading all the books that were available on military strategy, and by the time he had finished, he realized he knew more than any of his generals. He was highly idealistic in his values. He was known to be absolutely honest, but he understood that there's a distance between idealism and what can be done, and he was waiting, and he was very pragmatic in what he tried to do. And he was often accused by the Northern abolitionists of caving in because he wasn't willing to stand up for the rights of the slaves when they thought he should. He was personally, really, it wasn't just an ideals for him. This was a deep emotional commitment for him. These were heartfelt convictions of his. But he didn't preach. He was really a man of the people, grew up in rural Kentucky, identified with the people, was in tune with the people, spent most of his term going around into the military, not only to see the military situation, but to talk to the troops and see what they were, see what they were feeling, see their sentiment. He received people by the thousands, people coming to complain that their children were dying in the war and everything else. He really was a politician who was in touch with the people. He had great respect for other human beings. He was committed to preserving the Union. He was totally convinced slavery was an evil. He had a remarkable humility, very important for him, which others often mistook for weakness. He would let his cabinet people accuse him, abuse him, disagree with him on everything. And he said he never allowed a past offense to affect his current behavior. Somebody who has spread lies about him last year, if he's willing to come now and work with him, he puts aside, he said he has a very short memory for resentments. He has no time for them. He will deal with a person at the level they're willing to act now. And he had a remarkable capacity to forge alliances out of antagonists. He had people in the cabinet who were against each other, but who, by bringing them together, saw there was a common goal where they could both best fulfill their own aspirations. So remarkably, he got the support of his cabinet. And he was immensely patient. He didn't compel himself to act. He waited until he thought the right time to act. So what was the source of Lincoln's power? The way I presented it or perceived it, it wasn't his power individually. Individually, he wasn't a very powerful personality. He tapped the power of the society. He was in a position to do that, and he was in tune with it. He recognized the primary needs and aspirations of the society, and he expressed that, not what he was pressed to do. He had the goal. His goal was to discern at every moment what the public would permit and to go as far as the support would allow. And he acquired that power by something that's extremely difficult for leaders to do, by eliminating himself, by eliminating his sense of self-importance, or prestige, or having to prove himself to this party or that party, but getting out of the way so that he could really be expressing what the society wanted, what he perceived the society wanted. This story has a sequel, and I'm going to wind up in just a couple of minutes, but this is an important sequel for us, and Winston, I hope, will come back to it either today or in one of his subsequent presentations. Some of you may know the story of Rosa Parks. Just about 100 years after, 90 years after the 13th Amendment was passed, this somewhat 42-year-old lady living in Montgomery, Alabama, she got on a bus one day, sat in the rear section of the bus, which was reserved for the blacks, and along with a number of others. And at some way through the bus ride, the bus driver came back and said, the white section of the bus is full, so I have to ask all you color folks to move back further so I can move the partition, and you can be in the back of the bus. And half a dozen of them got up, as they have so many times in the past, and they moved further back in the bus. And this 42-year-old lady mildly said, just sat there. And he said, ma'am, you have to go and move. And she said, I'm not moving. Ma'am, this is the law in Alabama, in Montgomery. If you don't move, I'm going to have to report you to the police. She said, you better do it. This is the last thing the bus driver wanted to contend with. He parked the bus near a police station, went into the police. The police came and politely escorted her off the bus, put her in front of a judge. The last thing the judge wanted to do was have a case coming up about this. So he fined her $16, which she refused to pay, and then ended up spending the night in jail. And the next day, the entire black community of Montgomery, Alabama, declared a boycott on the bus system. And this boycott went on, 180 days or something like that, at the end of which the Montgomery municipal transport system was going bankrupt because they had a very large black population and they had all stopped using the buses. And so Montgomery changed their law to abolish the segregation on the buses. Well, it just so happens that the local clergyman in this town was a man named Martin Luther King, who was very active in organizing the black community in their protest and spreading the word everywhere. And this became the flame, the flicker, the little flame, the spark that set off not the only one, there were others as well. She was one of those individuals, not a great towering personality by any means, but one of them who did change the world and set something in motion by her actions. And I particularly mention it because I want to link this discussion later with what Winston's going to talk to us about law and the origins of law. And the idea, you consult most lawyers and you ask them about law, they'd say law is what's created in the legislation. But here's a law that was actually created or changed by the action of an individual. It's a link between that macro level and the micro level process. So in sum, I'd just like to sum up things that I think have already been said by others yesterday. The mechanistic, reductionist, materialistic, compartmentalized social theory has its value. It helped us in many ways, and I think we're all clear on that, and it came out yesterday. We're not trying to question the value of anything that's been done up until now. But it's inadequate to deal with the multidimensional complexity of the social challenges that we face today. Society is a complex, open, multi-level, conscious, creative web of human relationships. I like the phrase, a living organization. That describes something to me. Social science needs to unpack the significant characteristics that differentiate physical, biological, and social systems. And we had a little bit of a discussion about it yesterday morning. Ivo raised some points, I raised some points, and Ivo had some other things to say which we should come back to so that we get clarity on this. As to, we all recognize there are similarities and there are differences. And the more clear we can be about those, I think the more effectively we can go ahead. The individual occupies a unique position in society as both a determinant of the society and being determined by the society, as an active pioneer and initiator of social novelty, and as a passive beneficiary of social capacities, which was one of the themes of Janani yesterday, and she's going to come back and build on it today. An effective science of society would necessarily have to transcend the disciplinary boundaries. I think we all agree with the premise of desirability. It's a question of feasibility is what we really need to decide. To identify principles and processes that are fundamental to many fields, to all fields, to all different forms of activity and all different stages. And I think we've already seen some of that in the presentations yesterday that we need to catalog and discuss and look at much more seriously through the rest of the week. Thank you. Alberto.
Fascinating, beautiful. I would have wanted to know personally those people. But what you said, one thing struck, and that is my question, individuality. Now, it's clear that some presidents of the United States, some bankers, or, a much more humble Rosa Parks, by empowering themselves and taking a decision and tapping of the conscious, might be also subconscious reality, where great catalysts of change, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, the strike, gather sold freely. And in your opinion, since there are also, unfortunately, many millions of individuals that are passively watching television and drinking Coke, those special individuals, no matter if they're considered ineffective, shy, and ambivalent president, just by their trust and their vision about the future, have something special that make them think that unfortunately millions of others that seems not to, either possess or use. And if we saw how we could facilitate many more individuals that by empowering themselves, they empower also important sector of society. But thank you for a beautiful presentation.
Well, Alberto, your question is really wonderful, and I'm sorry that everybody who wasn't here last week to hear your presentations, because I think everything you were talking about and when you were quoting Rogers and others, was really the best answer to this. So I could plagiarize a little and add a few of my own thoughts, and I'd love to hear you answer it, because this is an experience you have. But I'd just like to make a few comments. I think that obviously we differ in the extent to which we express this characteristic of individuality. I think that society, and I think it's a theme we came to last week, that society seems to be more tolerant and more supportive of the blossoming of individuality than it has been in the past. And maybe Janani's going to talk to this, because she's going to talk about the other side. If I'm talking about the individual, she's going to talk about conformity today. The boo, we don't want all of this. But we recognize it's part of the equation. And to understand, maybe to fully understand individuality, we have to understand the role of conformity and what role it has played in society and why society has insisted on conformity. So, but I think over time, society is changing its attitude towards the individual, and we are doing more to encourage and promote individuality in the past, though I don't have a scale to measure and say whether we're 10% of the way there or 15% of the way there or what. I think it's also interesting, it's another point I hope Janani will address in her last talk, because she did last time. One of the striking questions Ashok asked on during the course last week, he said, how is it that great individuals all seem to come at one time, at our times of crisis, and then we don't see them anymore? I mean, in U.S. history, that's certainly true. At the time of independence, we had Washington and Jefferson and Adams and Benjamin Franklin and several others, and then we had a long period of mediocrity. And then at this critical crisis, we got Abraham Lincoln and a couple who were way down. And during World War II, we had FDR. And then you kind of scratch your head and say, you know, what happened to great? Of course, we had not just FDR, we had Churchill, we had a Stalin, so I think part of it also seems to be related to the social context in which we are. I wonder whether we would have ever heard of Lincoln if he had been born in 1861 and grown up, in the late 1800s. Or Washington, for that matter. I told the story last time. I don't think I'll have time this time. But Washington was really a product of his times. In some ways, he really was unique and very impressive. But in other ways, he was molded by the times to bring out these characteristics. So I guess the most fundamental thing I got out of last week's course was that our capacity for individuality far exceeds anything that we are expressing. And there are conditions that the society can create that are conducive to the development of that individuality, and Alberto has presented them in a beautiful way, and that's what his work is, to do that. And I hope that one of the outcomes of our work in the future is to show how, it's a project of the Academy, we put individuality as a project. Ivo and I did an article on genius, which is one form of individuality, where the individual has the courage or the freedom or the lack that breaks the conditioning to think beyond what other people are thinking, to think out of the box, Ivo's favorite phrase. So I think we're in a process. Carlos.
Thank you for these very inspiring presentation. Such appealing human examples. So I have a couple of comments. One is about the kind of personalities of whose Lincoln and Rosa Parks were examples. You said you were just 19. We do see them only in crisis. I think they exist always. But the norm, the social norm, the code of personality we have is still very much focused on what I would call, to simplify, the alpha male character. And an alpha male is mainly a woman, by the way. So Mrs. Thatcher was definitely an alpha male. And our social values are still very much focused on that type of person who do not comply with a trait which you mentioned about Lincoln, which is, in my view, extremely important. His self-effacing humility many mistook for weakness. Yeah. I think in the best individuals we can find, I call them angels, that humility you find the same thing in Mahatma Gandhi or in Mandela. So the best individuals you can find are people who are able to build their strength not out of selfishness and the alpha male behavior, but rather out of humility and passions, and those people exist always. Those are the people who, by the way, many, if not certainly the majority of them are women. Those are the people which make the society work. But we don't recognize them most of the time. So that's a very silent work. And sometimes, one of those persons, like Lincoln, emerge. So the intriguing question about Lincoln is, how did he get elected as president with all these psychological traits which are more or less a recipe for not being elected, because if the rest of the people think you are weak, I mean in the political arena, that doesn't look like a recipe for getting elected. So that was one point on the role of angels in society. And the second one was about the fact that we have to reinvent the whole educational system. So we have to throw it completely to the waste, and focus that, because we ingenuously tend to think that our educational system is good for, as far as meritocracy, as far as identifying talents is concerned, and that it selects the best, the most talented people of each generation. And my personal view is that everybody has talents, and the educational system basically fails in helping developing the talents of everyone, which are different from one to another, because it's still, the educational system is still very much a way of reproducing hierarchies, generation after generation. We are very self-satisfied. I think generally we are self-satisfied with thinking that the educational system in the Western world, and in particular in Europe, is good, is a meritocratic one. I think if one would look at the real data, I think the reality is closer to the fact that the system is still very much reproducing social hierarchies and not identifying the most talented people of each generation. So,
great comments. But the second one, Alberto is going to talk. He's going to come back to education, and we totally agree. That's why we created the World University Consortium, because we think there's got to be a different paradigm here in education. And so your words are, I think we all fully are behind you. Your first comment is very valid, and I gave example of that to show in a particular field, and you're right, taken out of, it can be read as if these are the only kind of individuals. Last week we were talking about all different kinds of individuality in the arts, in science, in many different fields, and these examples all happen to come from the male aggressive leadership. One thing, and if you look at a definition of individuality, which we also discussed much more, I didn't put one up here, is we were defining individuality not in terms of the person's achievements outside, but in terms of where they get their direction. Mm-hmm. The individual is one who is in tune with the society. But we don't mean the rugged individual who lives just for himself. He's in tune with the society. He's in tune, aligned with the best aspirations of the society and values of the society, but he's internalized it as his own. He's not just been imprinted or conditioned. He's made a conscious decision. This is what I believe, not just what I was taught. This is what I think is valuable, not just because other people take its value. He becomes his own self-referential, but he's in touch with the rest. So in that sense, it's a very valid point. Last time I also presented data from a book called Good to Great. It's a management study that was done in the U.S. about 10 years ago, which completely confirms this point about humility, because the stereotype is that the most successful companies must be led by these macho males, even if they're women. And what they found, quite the contrary, was the most successful businesses over long periods of time, the leaders of those businesses had one striking characteristic, and that was humility. They knew when to get out of the way and let people succeed and let people act and not insist on, on driving everything themselves. So, very good comments.
Two brief comments. One of what Carlos just said about the failure of the higher education, and that applies, in my opinion, more to the European failure than the Anglo-Saxon. Namely, it is very clear, since education is the reflection of the existing disciplines, we rarely take from the age of 18 somebody to be educated, let's say, as a physicist. But if that person happens to be talented, let's say, in the art, we don't recognize that at all, and so he's a failure. He rarely fails. Okay? Now, the Anglo-Saxon system there is somewhat better. This was the idea of the Bologna process, which in Europe totally failed because we don't have that. So that's one comment. The other comment that, of course, congratulations for the excellent talk. One thing that I am still finding a problem with is going from not acting to acting, the sin of omission. Eventually, of course, though he was reluctant, Lincoln acted. Rosa Parks is an example of a very humble, non-active person. And at one moment decided then to act. And this is a very important thing, how to act. And we sometimes typically consider that acting could be wrong, we make a mistake and so on, while non-acting in general is good, you don't, no, but it is actually this sin of non-action, which is in face of terrible problems. Yeah. We now live in a world which is full of problems. Everything is full of problems. And it's not that we are incapable of solving them. We are capable. We just do not work on them. So why is that so? Why we let people to suffer enormous injustice while we don't do anything? There are a lot of hungry people. There are a lot of, and there is enough food in the world. There are a lot of inadequately educated people who are capable of educating them. Why don't we do anything? That is one of the problems that somehow I would like to see. How do we come from the time when Lincoln did not act to the time when he acted? When Rosa Parks was doing all the time, the same thing, moving back, obeying, saying yes, 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 and then finally, it did come to her and trigger a major revolution.
I just want to follow up Ivo and then ask him, isn't that the physical problem? How to overcome forces of inertia?
Yeah,
this is a huge problem.
Yes.
I mean, we have in physics, and we have in society, we have also inside, why I am not acting,
Yeah.
So, maybe this is something what we should make more studies on this and then find the solution, how to overcome. The inertia forces are very powerful.
Very powerful.
We are underestimated.
Yeah. We always underestimated the risks of not acting.
Yeah, there is a risk of
the risk of, you think that staying on the same way day after day, you think that this is not risky.
Yeah, exactly. We overestimate the risk of action and underestimate the risk of inaction because it keeps the status quo. So it means that somehow we are, as human beings, very conservative. Satisfied with the status quo and are afraid of the change. So this is something where, coming back to my question to Ivo, how to overcome the forces of inertia.
Okay, well, one simple thing is that part of the history of the World Academy it had one reasonable turning point where we actually started writing emails with the heading "A Crazy Idea." Immediately recognizes this idea, which is likely to be crazy, but let's think about that.
Yeah.
And so it started a number of interesting things out of these crazy ideas. Matter of fact, it turned out that luckily, though I would say that the typical ratio would be one good out of 100 crazy ideas, in the case of the history of the academy, it turned out that almost 8 out of 10 turned out to be good ideas. Why? Okay, let me give you an example from the another part of history, this time dealing with the military. There is a famous battle between the English and the combined fleet of the French and the Spanish. The Battle of the Cape of St. Vincent, where, of course, just as in any battle, all right, one of the ships, commandeered by one captain, decided to do something in order to prevent the action of the Spanish fleet, contrary to the general direction of the admiral. Okay? Then he ended up in trouble. Then there was another captain who happened to be at that time still unknown, but later on famous, Nelson, who noticed that this guy ended in trouble. Came along again, went against the order, maneuver, and then finally the admiral, rather than being unhappy, said, Jesus, they are acting as if they are following what I really saw they should be doing. So this collective spirit that we somehow have to put together, and this is a very important point that Garry pointed out, this link between on one side an individual and on the other side a society. This interaction we also don't understand quite well. You know, how do you do it? Why it worked in the case of Franklin Delano Roosevelt? Why it worked there? Why doesn't work now for a number of political leaders? You know, one speaks this, another speaks that. The public does not follow that. You know. So this mechanism is a non-trivial thing. Sometimes it's called charisma, you know, but charisma is again a word which means nothing.
I see a question online from Ashok Naparajan. Ashok, do I have to do anything?
No. Garry, I see three different forms of society, and I am not sure which one is ideal. But there is the society where the society is all powerful and the individual's freedom is very minimal. That is the primitive form of society.
Okay.
Now it occurs to me that when society is highly evolved, a situation may come about where the individual is given maximum freedom and the social authority over him is somewhat negligible.
Mm-hmm.
But then I see a third option where the freedom of the individual and the social authority over him are roughly equal in measure.
Mm-hmm.
This third option I feel is the ideal form of society, but I don't know if any society has managed to devise a method by which the individual's freedom and the social society's authority over him are exactly equal, so that there is a healthy balance between the needs of the individual and the needs of the society.
Very good.
Society can evolve such a scheme, it may work for the benefit of all.
Okay, thank you, Ashok. I will repeat the question.
Yes, please.
Ashok says he can conceive of three different types of society. One in which the collective is all powerful and the individual has very little freedom. A second in which the individual has maximum freedom and social authority is at the minimum. He's not sure that either of these is an optimal formula, and he's trying to envision whether there could be a society where there's a greater balance and equality between the two, whether that's possible, how it could be brought about. That's his point. Would anybody like to respond?
Okay, can I venture an analog to physics? There is no way that physics is arranged in such a way that there are giants. A giant is Einstein, another giant is Newton. Okay, the society is the collection of all physicists. Now they all consider these two giants to be above and beyond anybody else, and all physicists want to show that Einstein is wrong. And as a matter of fact, by showing that Einstein is wrong, they believe they are doing the greatest service to Einstein, rather than to negate him. Now, okay, let's go to the everyday's life. If you go and tell to the king that he is wrong, you can't be decapitated, right? On the other hand, look, when you come here and give a talk, one of the worst assessment anybody's thought, would be that we all just applause and stay silent. Right? That would be the worst thing. You want criticism. So, okay, these are some of the things. Obviously, we know in certain domains how to do it, and then there is this powerful force of inertia, but it's more than inertia, it's fear as well. And it's fear of two things. One thing is a fear that you will be punished, and the other thing is a fear that you will end up being stupid. And this is why it is very good to be very old, because then you can afford being stupid, When you are young, you think you cannot afford being stupid, but the best thing you can do is to be stupid.
Anyone else like to comment? Ashok, I'd also add a comment that I think it's clear, we all know that the first option doesn't work very well. It may have worked during the time of Genghis Khan as a military society. It doesn't work in the modern period of the kind of creativity and the type of life that we aspire for today. I think we also know, I certainly feel, that the second alternative where you get maximum freedom, I think freedom works in the measure that our values are internalized. And when you give more freedom than we have values, then you get the kind of rugged individualism that has been quite prevalent in the U.S., where everybody's working for themselves. And I'm not saying everybody, I mean you see that strand, the neoliberal, just let us all be free and we'll be better off, which can have very detrimental effects. It gives widening inequality, widening disparities in the society. I think I agree with your premise that neither of these two works. Is optimal. So the question is, what would be optimal? I think the optimal comes not just from an external balance of these, but in the measure we can get our culture and our education right, in the measure our citizens can internalize values, in that measure we don't need the external authority to impose and enforce things. And so I would come back to the topic of education, in which Alberto is going to speak tomorrow, and say, how do we promote members of the society who are not just conforming, are not just living for themselves, but really have internalized to some extent values that include a vision for the fulfillment of other people and for the earth and for all of mankind. And how to do that, I think maybe in some clumsy way we're doing that better than humanity has done it in the past. But we're at such an early stage, it's hard for us to understand exactly what's working or why.
A short comment on what you just said about Genghis Khan. I'm not a historian. I'm sure there are many people here who know this very much more than that. I think Genghis Khan actually is not an example of a dictator, but rather an expression of the spirit of all of them. They were after conquering, and he was just the best one to organize these conquests. And then when he died, then they continued still doing this thing. So, different example, I think, is Alexander, because Alexander also did the same thing. Was very successful as long as he went conquering. Then suddenly he wanted to be something else. No, not suddenly, but he wanted to be something else. And he wanted to be a creator of East and West together put and so on. And at that time, luckily he died, of course, his entire system crumbled down. Because they were not for that. So this is the important thing. You said that with Lincoln. Lincoln was really the expression of the aspiration of American people, though they did not maybe even know that they wanted that. But he was that. So these are very, very, this is why I think that the only serious science is psychology plus neurosurgery. This is the only real science. Everything else is simple.
You still have about 5 minutes. Yes.
Two minor, thank you for your presentation, two minor footnotes. I think that it's helpful to compare freedom with liberty, because there are two different concepts. Freedom is a German-based concept, liberty is a Latin-based concept. And they are essentially different one another, because liberty requires that the person is well educated, is wealthy. So you can have liberty when your style of life, your education, or whatever is in your background is robust enough to allow you to see the beauty of art and this and that thing. While freedom is for everybody. As a German concept, it is a theoretical concept, it's a concept for all people, for everybody. So liberty is, it requires that there is a very important hierarchical difference among people, and only those at the top can have true liberty, not those in the lower ranks. While freedom is for everybody. So these two concepts are very different, obviously, and by understanding their interaction, we can dig deeper into some of the problems that we have to face. Second comment, very shortly. I agree with you. We have big problems with our education systems. But there is one major issue that we may at some point start addressing. All the education systems we know, they are entirely based on the past. I mean, it is important to know who Julius Caesar has been and this and that, because it's part of our identity. And so it's important that schooling system provide information on what we have done in the past, according to different cultures. Why? A fragment, a component, an aspect of the future shouldn't be present in the education system. And interestingly enough, a few experiments have been conducted, especially in Australia and in Finland, and in a few other places, and all of them failed. Because the education system as an institution has extremely serious problems with what is the future? How can we teach the future? I mean, there are quite a number of issues that are deep, difficult, but nevertheless relevant. Because giving new students at least some idea of what may happen, not what will happen, of the possibilities that may encounter in their life, and how can they develop better individual strategies for themselves, develop plans for becoming disruptive, but that will be something that will be extremely helpful as a society. But our educational systems have enormous troubles.
Yes, they are extremely conservative.
Yes, they are. Yes, in a sense, they don't know. Backwards on it. It makes sense to some degree, but not entirely. That's the issue.
Can I intrude into our...
I just note that we just have a couple of minutes, and we have one more question, perhaps you know, from Veronica Danella online. If we can just...
Yes, please read it.
Okay, I read it out. I do not know if my question fits in his speech, but I would like to know your thoughts on the proposition of sociologist Pierre Bourdieu spoke of symbolic violence in the social order within the various fields, defined as network sites of objective relations. These instances are powerful tools of symbolic domination on the individual. Lots of talk about recognition of their legitimacy, not as free active consciousness. Do you think that the individual can achieve a personal realization freed from these aspects?
I would say that the concept of epistemological communities, communities that hold different epistemologies, in another way, having what we intuitively all know, that we live in different communities. And that in terms of what is really freedom, what is liberty, I was wondering if we need also a statue of freedom. We have already one of liberty. Is unfortunately varies from epistemological community to another, and also varies in time. So actually, what Rosa Parks rebelled against, for many people was black people probably was even considered natural order of things. And so in different individual, in different society, and in different times of history, we have to determine what is acceptable, right, and just. And also there is always the majority that is probably what we call the norm in epidemiology, and usually there is two minorities. One is the ruling elite, the one that has most of the power, the use of the resources. Another is another minority is the opposing elite that is pushing for social change, for revolution, and for evolution. So my answer is not black or white. It's actually always a dynamic system, and if we want to have a parameter, many parameters we use in history for judging, I would say my parameter would be how much a society grants rights to everybody, doesn't matter which color, gender, sexual orientation, religion, so the most, going back to your lecture, the juice of it is the most just society is the one that mostly is able to protect and promote human capital and creativity to produce for the rest of society added value.
Great. Anyone else want to respond to Veronica? I'll just add one line, if I've understood it correctly. I think it's certainly true that the impact of the society and domination in any form, symbolic or physical, certainly discourages the development and expression of individuality. But we see individuals in all periods. The environment can discourage the expression of the individuality, but we do see great individuals emerging in periods where the environment is very repressive. How far they express their individuality doesn't define the extent to which they're individual. I think we are all constrained by authority in various forms that prevents us or discourages us from giving outward expression to our individuality. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that we cannot be developing individuality internally. So I think there's two sides to it. One, certainly to encourage the development of individuality, we have to address these issues, as Alberto said. Yes?
We should not get pinched in
A little bit.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I mean, the reason was actually following what Roberto said about education, which is not going into the future at all. we in the Commercial University College, and actually Warren would say more about that, are preparing now to have, besides this standard school of diplomacy and foreign relations, something more oriented towards sustainable development and ecology and so on. And one of the issues there is many of the people working there, I mean, Warren in particular, stressed, of course, what students should know about the future, because the future diplomat, for instance, should know certain things about science. Now, those people who enroll in political sciences are those who happen to hate mathematics, physics, and so on. So you cannot give them a kind of a course that would trigger, that would sort of, put them off in some way. On the other hand, there are two problems. One problem is that essentially nobody is in the position to say what would be the major discoveries in science in the next 10 years. But on the other hand, there are certain things in science that we do know will happen. For instance, there will be an enormous ICT present. We know that. Whether there will be something else, we don't know. There will be an enormous amount of synthetic biology, which means we will be able to have, as I said yesterday, human body that will be modified and so on. Instead of just having a pacemaker, I will have an implant for here, an implant for there. I should be the sky is the limit, and we know that will be there in 20 or 30 years. We may be able to, obviously, we know that we have the capacity of living to roughly 130 years. Now we live roughly 80 years, and there will be definitely push this in another 20 years when these kids really, are there. I mean, it will be over 100. So we have to get used to that. Similarly, of course, we also know another part that is not physical and life sciences. We know very well what is going to happen with demography. We know that we are going to go to roughly 10 billion, and then in another century, we know, I think we heard that lecture by Burr, we are going to go down to 3 billion, This is facts. And you don't have to, but then you will have many surprises. So this is something that we should teach students.
Okay, great. That's really interesting.